Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. We're going to be discussing happiness, largely conceived. And we want to talk about Aristotle's direction of happiness. And where does our concern come from, Onar? From some of the comments that have been left on some of the videos, right?
Yeah, I've noticed that Seibel and Oligarchy Slayer, and for that matter, they reference Charles II, a new intellectual. They have a very disintegrated view of happiness. They don't understand it at all. And we see that, for instance, Jordan Peterson talks about pursuing meaning instead of happiness. So I can sort of forgive Peterson because he's a psychologist. He's not an Aristotelian. He's not a philosopher. So he's using, just like I can forgive, like Steven Pinker talking about the blank slate in a psychological sense rather than in the epistemological sense. I can forgive Peterson for talking about happiness as like a synonym for joy, but that has nothing to do with the philosophical meaning of happiness. And it's such a bad thing that Ayn Rand's philosophy has been corrupted by these youngsters who have picked up on hedonistic concepts of like joy and pleasure and inserted these into her theory, and taking like a Humean approach, like using statistical measures and averages for joy instead of the Aristotelian sense, which is what Ayn Rand started from. So I think it's very useful to go back to Aristotle first and talk about what he meant by happiness, eudaimonics, which means good spirit. And once you understand Aristotle, it's much easier then to understand Ayn Rand.
Now, if we define everything properly, is it going to be the case that we're going to discover that Jordan Peterson and Eric Weinstein and company are referring to the same thing because they want contentment over time? They want you to do the right thing today so that you're not upset about yourself tomorrow, right? So ultimately, Aristotle means he means happiness in a long-term, very integrated, very conscious sense. That a happy man is a man who's done good over time. A man is what he does. And so over time we're going to find a man who believes in the things that he does and has reasons for them, and over time is confident. And he will be Aristotle's happy man, and he will be the only man who can really kick back on an evening and enjoy a bottle of wine, because the guy who doesn't even have a house and he just gets a few dollars and gets a bottle of wine and is laying in the gutter isn't really enjoying his bottle of wine, unlike the really truly happy guy who paid $100 for his bottle of wine and he sips it sitting in a nice chair in his nice home. So a really happy man can really, really enjoy things around him. And are we just going to find at the end of the day that Jordan Peterson and company are talking about eudaimonic happiness, but they have disowned the word happy for some sinister reason? I propose.
No, I wouldn't say that it's sinister. It's just that they're bad thinkers and they've absorbed through a cultural appropriation or cultural, permeation. This very bad concept of happiness. But at the end of the day, when Jordan Peterson talks about meaning, he's very close to the Aristotelian concept of happiness, but not quite, almost. But so he's leaning in that direction. But because he's a bad philosopher, he's a good psychologist, but a bad philosopher, he doesn't know how to formulate this in a philosophically good way.
Well, he downplays happiness, and then Eric Weinstein, I heard, he said every time he hears someone say happiness is the purpose of life, he dies a little bit inside or something like that. So these guys, they don't, not only do they say happiness isn't the purpose of the life, they say if you do pursue it as the purpose of life, you'll be wrecked, right? So,
well, I am a little bit more suspicious about Eric Weinstein than I am about Jordan Peterson, because Weinstein is a lefty. He is a collectivist. and he wants to do collective stuff. And when he hears someone just pursuing their own happiness, that's when he dies a little bit inside.
Yeah. So,
He
yeah.
wants to have this huge collective thing.
Yeah. But they attack happiness, but at the end of the day, they are, I mean, Jordan Peterson, leaving Eric Weinstein aside, then Jordan Peterson, he is telling people to clean their room, and if you see a cat on the street, pet it, and these things. He's doing this because he's advocating that you try to be a good person over time, which will make you happy.
Yes, so he's very close to Aristotle, but he doesn't recognize it, and he doesn't acknowledge his roots in Aristotle.
Now, I think the reason for that is because modern hedonism, postmodern hedonism, and nihilism have given happiness a bad name, and it looks like just a decadent, forget history, forget your values, have no values except pleasure in the modern moment.
And notice here, we did actually have words for this for joy. That's not the same as first we have joy, but in addition to that, we had gay and merry, which happened to be like Merry Christmas and gay old time. Right? We've lost gay to the hedonists who call themselves homosexuals. But also, just to bring in a fun side fact here, is that originally Robin Hood was a homosexual because he was going around in the woods with his merry men. And gay is like a synonym for merry, right?
Where did Robin Hood come from? I don't know where Robin Hood came from here.
No, Little John was his best friend, like, and he's going around in the woods. No, I'm not serious. I'm serious about this because he got a girlfriend later, but the earlier stories about Robin Hood.
He got a girlfriend later. Okay.
Just notice that the word merry men, even then, merry was a very, like, it was gay in the happy sense, but also in the modern hedonistic homosexual sense. Uh-huh. So it's hedonism. It's a disintegrated form of joy. It's like going for pure pleasure, regardless of anything else. So if you level sort of a criticism against, for instance, what the gays did in the 1970s, like if you look at Freddie Mercury, who got AIDS, everyone had AIDS, everyone had every possible venereal disease of these gays. So AIDS mostly just transmits among gays because they just live in the moment, no thought for tomorrow. I'm not saying that all gays are like this, but it captures the essence of hedonism, right? It's that pleasure is the all-encompassing meaning of life, having pleasure. But to say that happiness has something to do with this form of pleasure is a complete misunderstanding of the word happiness. If Aristotle meant that, he should have used the Greek word for joy or for pleasure, but he didn't. He specifically didn't use those terms. So he didn't mean joy, and he didn't mean pleasure. He meant good spirit. And that is something different, and we can read from Aristotle what he means by that. And the literal meaning of good spirit, we talk about being in good spirit, but we can also read it as having a clear conscience, a good conscience, that we're guilt-free, that if you're in a good spirit, it means that you have a guilt-free existence. And this is precisely how Aristotle meant it. He meant it in the meaning of, I have lived as, I perfected my own human being, my identity, so that I now live as an excellent human being. So my virtues have perfected me into an excellent human being, and from that I get a good spirit. good in a double meaning, good in the sense of deriving joy from it, joyful spirit, but also good in the moral sense. It's a moral spirit.
Now, we can give Aristotle credit for his definition of happiness here, but he didn't really define virtue very well. He said good is what good men do, right? Virtue is what virtuous men do. So he really didn't have a really good roadmap for how to get to this happiness he spoke of. He just spoke of it as being virtuous, doing good things.
Now, he did talk about the Aristotelian mean, which was a very crude way of thinking of it. And that's fine, but one of the things he did say is that he took pleasure in being moderate. Pleasure in moderation.
Yeah, okay, that is one of the keys, isn't it? I forget once in a while because it's such an equivocation. I try to not think too much about it, but the golden mean, right?
And like my father, he was born during World War II, and he led a very frugal early life because they were poor. And so as part of its core values, he's saving stuff and he's trying to be frugal and moderate, and he's perfected that over a lifetime. And now in his old age, he takes such great pleasure in just trying to save money on things and on being frugal and moderate. So for instance, if he has a choice between two wines, one is a very good deal. It costs only $1 or two, like $1, and there's another that costs $5. And even if it tastes 10% better than the one that costs $1, he doesn't take full pleasure in the one that costs $5 because the bang for the buck is in the one that he gets from $1, right?
Yeah.
So he sits there while sipping this wine and he says, I can't believe I was able to find a wine that tastes this good that costs only $1. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Now I would surmise that is precisely what Aristotle was talking about when taking pleasure in moderation.
Mm-hmm.
That you have perfected your habits over such a long time that you're now in the perfect zone of what it means to be a human. Now, of course, he wasn't being too clear about it, so people take it to mean just moderation is good.
But we have a pretty good, let's look at his idea of, we have a pretty good anti-parallel, a juxtaposition that we can look at in modern thought. So Aristotle's idea of happiness is be consistent with virtue over the long term, and you'll be a happy person. You'll be content and joyous. Whereas in the modern world, in order to be happy, we have a phrase. And being happy in the modern world means to just forget everything, forget tomorrow, throw everything out the window and do what you want to do. And it's called YOLO. You only live once.
Don't worry, be happy.
Yeah, don't worry, be happy. YOLO, baby. And just forget everything, throw everything out the window and just live in this moment right now. Very opposite of Aristotle.
That's hedonism that's snuck in. I would like to add in also another very bad idea that has snuck in, that has destroyed Aristotle's concept of happiness, which comes from David Hume. And it's David Hume's statistical concept of induction. He says that we can be quite sure that swans are white because we've seen many white swans. But we can never be 100% sure because we might see a black swan. That's from David Hume. So basically, he turned induction into a statistical concept, where the more we see of something, then the more certain we are that this is true. Peikoff, in his lecture called "Induction in Philosophy and Physics," absolutely slams that idea. He says it's complete garbage to think of induction as some kind of like statistical averaging across time. He says when a baby for the first time sees a paper that burns, he immediately generalizes to paper burns. He only needs to see one simple example of that, and he's generalizing something. Now, he might need to refine that generalization later, like not all kinds of paper burns, because if you add in too much ink into the paper, color, it doesn't burn. Or if it's water on the paper, it doesn't burn. If it's not enough oxygen in the air, it doesn't burn, and so forth. But those are modifications, refinements. The general induction is still true. Paper burns. And he only needed one instance of that. And he uses one example where it's, what's the guy, Benjamin Franklin, with the lightning. He proved with one observation that lightning was an electrical phenomenon. One single experiment.
And he proved it not only at that time, but for all history and for all future.
Yeah. So the idea that induction is like we have to see many things many times in order to be more and more certain, but it can always fail. That's a horrible idea that comes from David Hume. And Hume is a disintegrationist, right? He destroyed induction, which is one of the reasons I think that he's a much worse thinker than Kant. Like Hume has done much more to destroy the faculty of reason than Kant has, because he destroyed induction. Induction we got from Francis Bacon. He got things right, but then Hume came along and destroyed it, which is very, very bad. So now what modern thinkers have from Hume, unfortunately, is that they think of everything in terms of statistics. Like the concept of normal has been destroyed. And in the comments, I could see that these young yuppies who believe that they know everything about objectivism, despite being like 5 years old, they use the word normal in this Humean sense of the term. And what they mean by normal, it's statistically something many people do. So one example gave that in a Christian society, it's normal to pray, or something like that. Ayn Rand did not have the statistical concept of normality. So in her, when she writes about emergency law, she says that even if there is tragedy all around you, statistically, 95% of the people around you are altruists, and it's death and destruction all around you, still not metaphysically normal for a human being to experience that. So statistics is not the same as normal, right? So what does she mean by that? And now we go back to Aristotle, and in fact, we have to now take a little bit leap forward in time, the great leap forward, to biology. Because if you ask a horticulturist or something who has a greenhouse that is growing plants, what do they mean by normal when they say normal growing conditions, right? What they are really saying is, here's my plant, and I can map out all sorts of variables like how temperature, heat, sun, CO2 level, and minerals and so forth. And there is an optimal growing range for plants. So there's an optimal region that if you can get all the parameters inside this tiny little region, that's where your plants will grow and flourish most optimally.
And those are normal conditions.
Yes, that's perfect being in Aristotelian sense. That's the perfection of that life form. So when you are, Aristotle talks about a life of excellence. If we translate that into, if we take away the conscious part and just talk about plants, we can still talk about something analogous to excellence, namely optimal growing. What are the conditions in which a plant can live its life to its fullest? and that's the optimal growing conditions. That's the metaphysically normal. So normal means that region of optimal being. That is the metaphysically normal. That is how Ayn Rand uses it. And normative ethics applies to the metaphysically normal. So when she's talking about emergencies, you're outside of that domain or region of optimal existence. Lifeboat ethics is not optimal.
Now, you're not accusing Oligarch and company of using lifeboat ethics, are you?
No. I'm accusing them of using the term normal in the Humean sense of the word, in the statistical sense, and that is a very bad way of doing it. And by the same token, if you now say that happiness is also a statistical concept, you completely destroy the concept of happiness. Because some people define happiness as simply like, on average, over a lifetime, statistically, you should have most amount of pleasure. You should optimize the total sum of pleasure over a lifetime. That would be the wrong way. That's sneaking in David Hume into your thinking, because that's not what that means. Because there are some awful anti-life ways of doing that. Suppose that the people in the Brave New World, the scientists in the Brave New World, find drugs and a chamber that they can put you in so that you get stimulated through your eyes and drugs, so that they optimize the amount of pleasure throughout your time. You're just a little brain in the vat, and they're just feeding you all sorts of stimuli. So at the end of 80 years, you have experienced the most pleasure that you can possibly have as a human being. They've optimized, you maximized pleasure. Ayn Rand would shrink in horror at that idea, and as would Aristotle. It's a life of masturbation. That's not happiness. That has nothing to do with happiness. Just like Peikoff is very sharp at saying that this idea of statistically counting up the number of white swans to be sure that all swans are white. He was very adamant about that. Ayn Rand would be equally adamant that you can't just sum up the number of pleasurable moments in your life, and this sum equals your happiness.
Well, it's because some moments of pleasure, if done correctly, some moments of pleasure are going to have a lot more import than, like, for example, I could think of when Ayn Rand was walking down the street with Leonard Peikoff one day, and 12 publishers were fighting over the rights to get Atlas Shrugged, to publish Atlas Shrugged. And she said to Leonard, she said, never give up what you want in life. The struggle is worth it. So on that particular day, there were a lot of people walking down the street in New York City, but very few of them had a world-changing novel that they had spent years writing, and now it was done, and they were walking down the street knowing that it was done. And that day of happiness is so potent for her compared to some other person walking down that same street who was on the way to see his mistress and get drunk and then go home to his wife and feel bad. That was a very different day for those two different people. And
Absolutely.
And they were both trying to get some little bit of happiness out of life while they're here.
And also, we must not forget that eudaimonics is a pun. Good spirit means both pleasurable spirit, joyful spirit, and moral spirit. So good has a double meaning. It's not only that you have joy. If you take a lot of joy from slaughtering little babies, there are people who do that. And we would not say, oh, he's led a happy life. That's not a life of happiness, because it goes so fundamentally against his human nature, right? That's a sick, it's human being. It's a cancer on the human race.
So can we say for Aristotle, happiness is a concept which takes place in the nature of man over time. And if you drop the context of man's nature, or if you drop the context of action over time, either one of those, you're going to lose the concept of happiness.
So what he says, you can't really go, just like you can't really your free will is not just something you do at right now. You build up your habits over time, and then your free will plays out through your habits. Virtue is to create good habits. Good in the sense of two things: sense of being optimal with regards to your nature and being morally good. So, and this good habit, virtue, is then going to bring you a sense of moral joy. Now we're bringing the two terms of versions of good together. Good spirit, moral joy.
Now, how much of happiness is laughing with friends, and how much of happiness is having your bills paid and a good warm place to sleep? Like, let's say that a person has either one understanding of happiness or the other. Who's more correct? Sitting around with friends laughing is happiness, or having your bills paid and having a safe place to sleep is happiness?
It's the latter one that is more in alignment with it.
Yeah.
And in fact, this part Peterson actually understands, because he says that if you ask people if they're happy, they will mostly report about whether they have pain, to the degree that they are able to pay their bills, whether they have a sick child. If they don't have, if things are okay, if things are metaphysically normal in their lives, they report that they are happy.
Now, isn't that strange? There are these average people who work average jobs, and they have an average home and an average family, and they report happiness, even though they're not famous, they're not a millionaire, they don't live in a mansion, and yet they are able to say that they're happy.
Because they are perfecting man on earth. They're living their life to the degree that they have a certain identity, a certain being, and they are bringing this being into the zone of perfect being, of optimal living.
Meanwhile,
living as man qua man.
Meanwhile, Amy Winehouse, Mick Jagger's wife, and Robin Williams have all killed themselves.
Yeah. And there's a very interesting interview with Paul Stanley in KISS on Joe Rogan. Very worthwhile listening to. He reports having been very unhappy in his life, and like to the degree that he was incredibly depressed. And now in his old age, now he has a family, he has kids. Finally, he is happy. And he's talking about all the pleasure he had, but he was still unhappy despite all his pleasure.
He was a rock star doing drugs, had all the women he wanted, drink every night, party, party, party.
Now, he wasn't doing drugs. He was basically doing the sex parts, but he was living a rock artist lifestyle. Mm. But it's only now, in his later years, where he has found happiness. And it wasn't through all these pleasures. It was through finding a way to go into the zone of living as man qua man. And he doesn't say that, but he says now that he has a wife that he loves, and he has children that he has a good relationship with. He's starting to get old, and he has a contentment that before he had this unrest and sadness and depression that always haunted him. And he has to be aware of that still, because it's sort of part of who he is. But now he has a much greater contentment. He would now describe himself as happy. And he didn't find that as a rock star.
Right. So because living in a normal way is the way to unlock happiness.
Not just normal, but normal in the Aristotelian way. normal in the way that Ayn Rand uses the word normal. It's not just normal, it's metaphysically normal. It's a real concept.
Yeah. And it would be metaphysically abnormal for me to do, oh, geez, what can I think of it? But the culture around us accepts it as normal, but it's actually metaphysically abnormal. We could certainly come up with instances.
Yeah, living as a hippie.
Yeah. Yeah, metaphysically abnormal, but the culture accepts it.
Yeah.
So
there are lots of things now going on that are metaphysically abnormal. So this culture of unreason is abnormal.
Now,
and it makes people unhappy. So therefore we have the meaning crisis.
Now, how is Oligarch Slayer and company going to take this? Are they going to see the connections, or do we need to make explicit connections to particular statements they made here?
No, I think they understand what we're talking. I was called a troll. Clearly, I was a troll because I didn't understand what the word normal meant. So these people have picked up the meaning from David Hume, and they don't understand where they've gotten it from, and they don't understand that this has nothing to do with the way Ayn Rand was thinking or Aristotle. And so, and they probably got it from Charles too, because he was praising Charles too, that he was thinking just like them. And if he thinks just like them, then he's a very bad thinker. And this makes me even like Yaron Brook even more when he's disparaged too by saying that Ayn Rand didn't trust anyone who called himself a philosopher under the age of 40.
Do you know Charles too did a video called "Is Believing Things on Faith Bad?" or something like that. It was really speaking directly to the talk we just had a few days ago about religion and stuff. And so I went and watched it. I've watched it before, but I went and watched it again in light of our conversation. And he never gave one real-world example of believing something on faith that is true or whatever, and whether that's a good or bad. He did very much what Leonard Peikoff said once. Leonard Peikoff said, if all you're doing is fire burns and dogs wag their tail and all you're doing is that stuff, that's not philosophy. You've got to take it to reality with real examples, or else you're just doing armchair philosophy. And it struck me with Charles too, I don't remember exactly the title of the video, but one of the examples of believing something on faith and yet it helps you was people taking Aristotle's philosophy on faith and saying everything Aristotle wrote is gospel. And that went on for a couple hundred years. And then the essence of Aristotle became so ingrained in society that the other stuff fell away, the bad parts fell away. And so that's where believing something on faith can lead to a tangentially good result, possibly. And so that was an example, I thought. Is he ever going to get to the example of the Renaissance and Aristotle? And he never did. He just went on with calling your girlfriend and fire burns and this garbage. So maybe there's more to this problem with Charles too than we realize. Maybe he has trained a small generation of objectivists who are not able to think about reality.
That's why I wanted to have this conversation also, because clearly they don't understand the Aristotelian meaning of happiness as good spirit, and they clearly don't understand the Aristotelian and Ayn Rand's meaning of normal in the sense of perfect man or a perfect being on earth, as in man qua man. When Ayn Rand talks about man qua man, that's what she means. She's talking that you should live your life as metaphysically normal. That is what you're aiming for, that you're in the field of optimal growth, of human flourishing. Think about a plant. When does a plant flourish the most? It's under optimal growing conditions. The difference between a plant and us is that a plant is literally just blowing in the wind. It doesn't have any free will to affect where it's going to be and how its environment is going to be. We can actually perfect and hone our virtues so that we are making it more and more likely that we're spending our time in that optimal zone of man qua man. We can actually do that. A plant can't do that. It has to depend on the weather and whatever happens. We can actually change our locations. We can go where the weather is good. We can go where we can live as man qua man. We can change the world around us to living in an optimal state.
So happiness isn't moment by moment, it's over the long term.
And not only over the long term, that's part of it, but it's not just an average pleasure, because if that was true, you can just put yourself in a semi-coma state and just receive lots of morphine and like be in a pleasurable state most of your life.
No, over the long term, meaning more like happiness is the house that you build. So every day you're going to have to put a few boards and nails in place. It's going to have to progress every day. So
it has to be anchored in reality. So if you're just sitting and masturbating or playing World of Warcraft, that's even if you derive pleasure from it, if that's what it's basically just, it's okay for like vacation, time from reality, but it's evasion from reality.
yeah.
You have to do something real in reality in order for it to stick. And as part of this controversy is also, what does it mean to do something real in reality? I would actually expand this World of Warcraft thing, that if you think that it's normal to live your life without having children, and you're proceeding as if that's metaphysically normal, then there's something wrong with you. There are people who can live their life as exceptional beings, not having children. Ayn Rand had more intellectual children than she could ever dream to hope from her philosophy, from her fiction. She will live for 1,000 years through her fiction. And that's more important a way of passing yourself on to the next generation than merely having children. But very few people can live like that, right?
Yeah.
So if your idea...
If we really wanted to, we might say Ayn Rand would have been happier in her old age if she had kids.
I'm not going to swear on this, but I have a recollection that I think it was Barbara Brandon who said, and we don't like her, but like I don't know how much we can trust her, but she said that in her old age, Ayn Rand was very unhappy, and she asked. I think it was she who asked her, why didn't she write another novel? And after Atlas Shrugged. And Ayn Rand answered, because she wasn't happy enough.
Yeah, I don't know if we can trust her. I've never heard that from anywhere else.
So I'm not putting too much stock in that. I'm just noticing that in her interview with, what's that in 1970s show?
Donahue?
Huh?
Was it Donahue?
Donahue, yes, that's the guy. In that interview, she asked about if she believed in heaven, does she believe in heaven? If she would she do something about that? And she said if she had truly believed in heaven, she would have killed herself immediately to join her husband Frank. Now, to me, that's an admission that she really didn't have anything to live for.
Right.
She was saying that she doesn't have any children. That brings her joy here now in her old age. All she's doing is waiting for death.
Yeah. That's a sad thing. One had ought to want to hang on to every day. And if you had kids and grandkids running around who
you're not going to want to kill yourself.
Yeah, and kids and grandkids who think the world of you.
Yeah. So, in fact, in that statement, you see the sorrow that she was carrying for not having children, the metaphysical sorrow.
Or and if not sorrow, then at least a lack of urgency to her existence.
Yes. Because even if Frank was dead, if they had kids and they had grandkids, I can guarantee you that she would not be saying that.
Yeah. Because for a grandkid, grandma is a metaphysical emergency. Grandma's really, really important. And
yes.
if grandma disappears, then that's really sad. So Being
That's
part
right.
being part of your grandkid's metaphysical reality is urgent for that grandkid.
Yes. And now notice here that from Ayn Rand's perspective, she would have felt an enormous sense of pleasure, moral pleasure, and also metaphysical pleasure, like just like I'm glad to be alive kind of pleasure, even with ailments and all of that, if she had kids, right? And not it's not enough to have kids, but like if she saw that she had brought them up to be good human beings that are living good lives and they're flourishing, she would take enormous pleasure in that. Now, of course, she had the next best thing. She had Atlas Shrugged and so forth. But even so, despite having Atlas Shrugged, in her old age, if she had known that she could see Frank in heaven, she would have committed suicide. That's very sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't have to take Barbara Brandon's words too seriously, but we can take her words seriously. She was not a happy person, fully happy person at the end of her life when when she's saying that her greatest value was no longer in this world.
Yeah, and I remember on it wasn't Donahue, I don't think, but she went on one of those talk shows and the guy said, oh, it was Donahue, and he said, you're not really readily available. You don't talk to the media very much and so on. So thank you for coming out for this once a year interview that you're doing. And she wasn't writing. And I remember she said that she couldn't write another novel because the world today is too disgusting. Do you remember her saying that? I think she said it to Peacock.
Maybe that's the same thing I'm remembering about why she couldn't write another novel, because that sounds like very much the same thing, that why she couldn't write another novel.
Yeah, she said the world's too disgusting today. She couldn't imagine a plot. And of course, the last plot she wrote was about destroying the modern world, going on strike and destroying it all. So,
but so that's sad. Like what she says basically, then it's the world around her allows her to define her sense of happiness. And then she's violating a little bit of her own ethos, where she says that an emergency, a tragedy, doesn't bring you down. It only brings you so far down because you have a core being of happiness where you know that this is not normal, right?
Yeah.
But for her, it stopped her from writing novels, which is kind of serious for a novelist, right?
Yeah. She practically gave up on public life there at the end. Part of it probably because the public hated Atlas Shrugged so bad, or the intelligentsia and academia were attacking it so bad. And she withdrew, and she spent a lot of time playing solitaire.
And that's fine, but now I don't want to go into like bash Ayn Rand's old age mode here. I wanted to bring out the fact that she did not have an optimal life at the end of her life.
Right.
I think that she would have had a deeper satisfaction at the time if she had a family. So now, I'm just pointing this out, that the metaphysically normal is to have children, and you better have a very good reason if you're not going to have children.
And even then, be prepared to pay the piper.
Yes, because I mean, if someone is gay, a homosexual, you sort of can't blame them for not having like a heterosexual family with children. Like, it's okay, but you can't say that that's metaphysically normal. Like, yes, they can compensate, they can lead good lives, blah 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 blah, but you're not building your world, your philosophy around that. You're saying that a homosexual can get by, and he too can live a happy life. But the normal thing is still a life for a heterosexual nuclear family with children.
I've heard more than one homosexual say they wish that they could just marry a girl and get on with having a regular family.
Well, it is no coincidence that the so-called transsexuals, have a 50% suicide attempt rate.
Yeah.
I think that like 40% of them commit actual suicides during their lifetimes.
Yeah, very, very high.
And that is regardless of whether they have done a change or not, a sex change or not.
That's evidence, I think, that this stuff is a mental disorder. It's not just a different way of being. So we're
Yes.
we're normalizing mental disorders,
Precisely.
which is a shame because we're also going in the other direction and mental disorderizing normalcy. Like it's perfectly normal to get addicted to drugs. There's nothing diseased about that. But we call it a disease. Drug addiction's a disease. It's not. It's absolutely normal physiological response to drugs. There's nothing diseased about it. There's nothing abnormal about getting addicted to heroin. It's utterly, utterly normal. And yet we call it a disease and we treat these people as patients and so on.
The one thing I do like about that, though, is that you're saying that it's not metaphysically normal. The normal thing is not to be, the metaphysically normal is not to be addicted,
Right.
not to live a life of addiction. So it is, in that sense, exceptional or abnormal. So rather than saying a disease, I would say that it's abnormal. And then it's an abnormity. Like cancer is an abnormity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though it happens frequently, and in that sense, statistical sense, it's normal for people to get cancer, it's still an abnormity. It's exceptional. It doesn't belong in man qua man or in an optimal life.
Yeah, I can imagine a doctor giving the bad news and the patient feels pretty sad and the doctor says, "Don't worry, people die of cancer every day."
It's completely normal.
It's completely normal for people to die of cancer. You're just being normal, don't worry.
Now, that actually brings to the forefront how ridiculous it is to say that just because something happens a lot, statistically, then that is metaphysically normal.
Right.
Right?
Like, if we did that, then metaphysically normal would be humans living in socialist hellholes, because 70% of the world is socialist hellholes, so...
And this is also one of the reasons when one of the most annoying ways of trying to comfort people who have experienced tragedy is to say, don't worry, this has happened to a lot of people. It's completely normal to lose your best friend or your dog, or it's complete. Like if people say that you shouldn't be sad or happy or you should at least take comfort that this happens to other people a lot, then you're completely misunderstanding that kind of emotion. It's precisely because it's abnormal that you're feeling this reaction, right? And statistical normal doesn't mean the same thing as metaphysical normal.
Metaphysically normal meaning in accordance with or in harmony with our nature.
Man qua man.
Man qua man. Man is the rational being.
Yes. Not just a rational being, but a rational animal.
Right. Rational animal.
So because we are more than just a being, we're actually an animal. And animals have things that are part of their being. So we have to take care of the animal too. The elephant needs care too, right?
Right.
So we're not just the elephant rider. That's like a rationalistic view of consciousness is something that you can divorce from our being, our biological being. Aristotle was not dualistic in that sense. He was very integrated. He didn't separate between mind and body. When he says eudaimonics, he's talking about having a good spirit of how you treat your body, how you treat your physical existence, right?
Yeah.
So to him, there was no distinction. So, and this is why I keep on hammering about this, about having kids being metaphysically normal. That's part of the elephant, the body, the metaphysically normal thing to do. And some people say, well, I don't get pleasure from that. Well, it's metaphysically normal in the sense that this is where you have optimal human existence. And the human part includes the elephant, the animal part. and reproduction is part of that. So much of your biology is tuned in for that part.
So for someone to say they wouldn't get pleasure from having kids is like saying they wouldn't get pleasure from having an orgasm and then having a little entity who loved them to high heaven.
Yeah,
and that's
unconditionally.
Unconditional love from a little entity, yeah. And orgasms are good, and unconditional love from little entities are good,
and creating a life, like being like a little god, where you create actual life,
a reflection of yourself too.
Yeah, not just any life, like a part of you. The blood in that person comes from you, like it's been part of you.
Yeah, and for people to say that wouldn't give them pleasure is strange, very odd.
Yes, and the thing is, like our life didn't start at birth. We were 4 billion years in the making. We are not like I'm not just 46 years old. I'm 4 billion years old. Now, granted, my consciousness wasn't born until then, but I was cooking and brewing for 4 billion years, and that's very much a part of me. So I'm just like, in his woo-woo language, Jordan Peterson talks about the spark of divinity. I think that the right secularization of that would be something like that we have the spark of infinity or spark of eternity in us. There's something infinite or eternal about us. It's a thread. It's not our entire existence. Mostly what we do is living in the now. But we're living in the now so that there's a circle that's supposed to be continuing. And think about what moral efficacy means. Moral cost, like, here's a summary of eudaimonics in modern terms. It's basically moral causation. Good things happen to people who do good things. So you are acting good in a moral sense, and something good is caused by your moral good actions, right? Now, what happens is that this cycle continues and continues and continues, and when you die, still something good happens. Even your life causes something good to continue. So that's part of moral causation.
Now it makes me think that our consciousness is a set of rules which, if we act in accordance with our nature, we will flourish. But not only will we flourish, life will flourish. Life will continue to flourish. If we act within our own flourishing, then we will not be the end of it, because we've got built into us certain things which are just a repeat from the previous generation, and they'll be repeated next generation. We've all found ourselves doing things we saw our dad doing, and we go, oh my God, I'm doing that now? And these circles repeat more often than we think. Our job is to live happily within the boundaries of a correct life. But living the correct life is the first step towards happiness.
Now, here's a way I like to think of it. Like Howard Rourke was the man without guilt, right? A guilt-free existence. And when Ayn Rand talks about altruism, she talks about it that your life must be justified to others, right? You have to justify your existence, not to yourself, but to others. So you're constantly having a guilt of your existence hanging over you to others. Now, that is altruism, and egoism means to live a guilt-free existence where you have a self-justifying existence, right? Now, suppose you are born. What you're receiving at the beginning is your life as a gift from someone who is very much like you. Now, think about that. If you receive an unearned gift from someone, just don't think about life, but just think about in general. Someone comes along and they say, you know what, I think you're a pretty decent human being. I'm going to pay college for tuition for you. something like that. And they give it just out of the blue. You didn't do anything to deserve it. Now, you can just say, that's nice, but if you are a moral being, built from the same moral fiber as Ayn Rand and Aristotle, you would say, okay, I got this gift for free, and I'm eternally grateful for it. But in order for me to not have a feeling of a guilty existence, I want to be able to show that I deserved that gift. In other words, I'm going to prove that the money that was given to me for free was not just for nothing. So I'm going to take that college tuition and do my very best in college. Right? That's my way of paying back by paying forward, so to speak. I'm taking that gift and I'm saying it was for free, but now I'm going to do the best thing with it. I'm going to honor that gift by doing the best with it.
Now, somebody who took that and they went to class drunk and then they quit going to class and they dropped out, and so they didn't make their best of that money, we would say that person took that gift for granted, or they didn't.
Without gratitude.
Yeah, without gratitude, they weren't appreciative of it, and because it just came to them from nowhere, so they didn't appreciate it. They took it for granted.
Yes. Now, what I'm saying is that our life did come from nowhere, but we didn't earn it. We were given that life as a gift. Now, we still have a metaphysical choice. We can choose to say that, screw it, I'm going to just treat that life as I'm going to go out with a bang and not live my life worthy of that gift. But so what I can say is that it's difficult to think of it as debt because it's a gift, but metaphysically it is a form of debt. I'm trying to be careful with my words here. It's a debt that can be repaid. You can actually make yourself worthy of that gift so that you can no longer say that your ancestors who gave you that gift has any sort of moral claim on you.
Not that they ever had a real moral claim on you, but just that you should be grateful for what they've given you.
I'm talking psychologically here. That you have to the core of your being a guilt-free existence. That you have a guilt-free consciousness.
Now, we would do this by doing something that our grandfather would think was good for us to do, or we would do this by moving the human condition forward one more step. What do you propose there?
We cannot pay back that gift, but we can pay it forward. That's our way of paying it back to the next generation, passing on the gift to the next generation.
So
that doesn't necessarily mean having kids, but that is the metaphysically normal way of paying forward. Ayn Rand had an exceptional way of doing it. People can't do that, most people. But most people, every human being has within, or most human beings have within their capacity to live metaphysically normal lives.
Women more so than men, it might seem. Women have this, more women lead this metaphysically normal life than men. There are more men who take exception to it and go off and do their engineers who can never talk to girls, or they're a soldier who dies in combat or something. And
strangely enough, that means that we have to think of a different kind of concept of normality for men. This is why men actually can go in war. It's normal for us to do so.
Normal.
Like, it's more normal. Like, it's within the like we actually have in our genes disposability.
Yeah, with courage and lack of fear and showing off to those around us. Yeah, those things are all very compatible with war.
So all that part makes it much more normal for us to be in a war than for women.
Yeah, for women, it's absolutely inappropriate behavior. Warfare.
Yeah. And for the same reason, it's normal for us to fight for our lives in war and with great risk, because our only other alternative is death. For the same thing, 50 Shades of Grey is more normal for women, right? Because their outcome of a war, if they lose, is they get raped. So through generations of natural selection, only those women who could withstand becoming a sex slave for the other tribe has been able to pass on their genes. So it's, in other words, that's why women have all these strange fantasies about like 50 Shades of Grey type men. It's because much of our existence has been to deal with that kind of extreme situation. Now, I'm not saying that's metaphysically normal, but that's more normal. It's in the fringe of normality, but like it's sufficiently normal that it has shaped women's psychology so that they like reading 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, I heard an interesting way Jordan Peterson put this. He said, a powerful man has the ability to cause mayhem for his enemy. And that's why women like a bad boy, because he has the ability to protect them. A man who's not powerful can't protect a woman. So a bad boy who can break the rules does have that ability, and that's why women like a bad boy. And women just want to make sure the bad boy is with them, protecting them. That's what they want.
So this is why it's such a truth. If a woman has a choice between a beta male and a wife beater, she will go with the wife beater every single time, or almost every single time.
Because what? Go ahead.
Because the wife beater is going to be a badass in war.
He seems like a safer. It seems she feels like she'll be safer with him.
Yes. Now, notice how this is unconscious. It's just the biology that has shaped these choices. Now, we want to bring those kind of things into the metaphysically normal. So we don't want to have wife beaters as the normal thing. I'm just saying that the beta male is such a sure path to extinction that you're definitely not going with that. So if your choice is between these two abnormalities, the wife beater is the better of the two. But of course, you want to have an alpha male who is who's willing to protect you in war. Like he's a real man. He's not a beta man, right?
Yeah, we're seeing that's unfortunately coming back to haunt Europe right now. They don't have any alpha males.
Which is the reason why so many women in Europe are marrying Muslims, because they see that even though these people are assholes, many of them, at least they're not beta males. So they're seeing unconsciously their spider sense is saying that we're just about to be taken over by another tribe, and all the beta males are going to be killed, and I'm siding with those who are going to survive.
Yeah. Women can change sides. They get to change sides.
Men cannot.
Yeah.
This is why men have a tendency of wanting to protect the borders, whereas for women it's not so important because they can change sides.
Yeah, women don't care. It'll be a hot fantasy for a woman to get raped by a bunch of.
No. Okay, I don't want to push it that far. It's just that they for them, they actually have another option to death.
Yeah.
Right. But we don't.
We do wonder how many females there are in Europe fantasizing about these sweaty, young, skinny Muslims coming in large numbers. I wonder about it. How many of them are not upset about all of these handsome young males coming into their society? I wonder.
Yeah. And of course, one of the reasons that this is they can do this is because that the men from their own societies are busy paying taxes to pay for these men coming from the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and paying for single mothers. So women are married to the state.
And the state's importing real men now.
Yes, sadly. But, yeah.
Well, I think we've left the happiness discussion behind.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we have. So let's just round up a little bit on and get back to the happiness and this. So there are two concepts, and I can't stress this enough. They don't understand happiness, and they don't understand what it means for something to be metaphysically normal. Both of those are important concepts to understand. Happiness means good spirit, good in the sense of both it deriving a pleasure from it, but also in the sense of moral. You have joy. Moral joy is perhaps the best way of describing it. It's not just any kind of pleasure. It's moral pleasure, joy from being a moral good being. And what is to be a good being? It's to live your life as much in accordance with your nature as humanly possible, and which means man qua man. That's the most humanly possible as possible. That is the metaphysically normal, the optimal way of living as a human, where you are most human, where human life flourishes the most, just like a plant flourishes the most when it's in its optimal growing range, growing condition.
Now, it occurs to me that we produce stuff. That is how we live, is by production, producing, whether it's meat in an ancient tribe or cars today. We produce stuff, and by producing stuff, we benefit ourselves first, and then those around us to whom we trade the stuff for other stuff. And it occurs to me that that cycle of produce in order to live, bringing you happiness. If you have kids, you produce, you provide to the kids, and that cycle gives you purpose.
It's a virtuous cycle. It's a cycle of virtue.
Of moral efficaciousness in reality.
Yes, precisely. Moral efficaciousness. Moral causation. Good things causes good things, which then causes good things, which causes good things.
And if you live inside that cycle of produce and provide to loved ones, produce, provide, trade, produce, provide, it just goes on in a happy way.
And then you can keep that cycle going forever. That is your spark of infinity or spark of eternity.
You get to play the part while you're there.
And like it's like performing for an audience in the future. When Ayn Rand wrote her novel, she would never, ever have taken such pleasure from writing that book if she didn't know that someone was going to read it.
Right. Now, is that collectivist of her? Is that anti-individualist of her to want other people to partake in her life and her values?
Well, I don't think so, but there are going to be disintegrated people who will claim so.
Yeah.
But in the same way, if you're not playing for an audience, if you're not writing your book for readers, if you're not creating music for listeners, and if you're not producing for another generation, then you're not participating in life as man qua man.
You're not participating in humanity.
That's right. And there has to be an audience. Like if you know that now we're just going out with a bang after, like, life ends after this date. So you just better party like it's 1999, right? That's where this expression comes from.
You know, this occurs to me. It occurs to me that, like, New Intellectual saying maybe he doesn't want to have kids. That's kind of like going up on stage and you do your part in the play, but then you just leave the theater. Now, if everybody did that, then there would be no one out in the audience. Everybody would just go up on stage, do their part, and leave, and there'd be nobody watching. So when you're done playing your part, you also have to take a seat and watch the others do their part. Because then, if you just do your part and leave, then why was anybody watching you?
Yes, that's also one way of saying it. But would he actually stand on stage if there were no one watching?
Exactly. Yeah. And if he's not going to take part in watching, then can he really consider them watching? Can he accept them watching him if he's not going to take a part in watching them?
That's the reciprocal relationship there, precisely.
Yeah.
So Ayn Rand didn't have her own children. She relied on other people to have children to listen to her ideas.
Yeah.
Now, that was okay. She could get away with that because she was a genius.
Well,
but that doesn't.
In our society, lots of people are going to get away with that. But the point is,
but in the long run, we're not going to get away with it, right?
Yeah.
What I'm saying, when I say get away with it, I mean she lived as a moral human being by her own standards, even if she didn't have kids, because she had intellectual kids, which are more important than actual kids, as long as not everyone is doing that. But her work was so exceptional that she could live an exceptional life. In other words, for her it was okay not to have kids, even though in old age she would have benefited from it.
Now, she had prestige, which is a bad word. She had notoriety societally, and it occurs to me that is a value, to know that you played some part in society, and she did feel that she had played some part in moving society towards some better future. And
but even then she said that she would trade it all away if she could just be with Frank.
Tragic. I wish for the world that she had some kids in her older age that she could have taken comfort in.
That's right. Now, the point here, now we're actually using Ayn Rand as an example of why you should have kids, which is a little bit ironic since we're objectivists. But I want to stress it out that even Ayn Rand, who lived such an exceptional, wonderful life and doing so much great work, living to the fullest as a novelist, still at the end of her life was willing to end it all if she could just spend another day with Frank.
Yeah.
She had nothing to live for in this world.
Now, what if she would have had? What if she had a little miniature Frank? After Frank died, she had a guy who looked just the spitting image of Frank, acted just like Frank, said the same things Frank said. And
she could see Frank's spirit in this new being, someone who had learned the lessons from Frank and from herself. She could see Frank as continuing in that little being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, notice how close that is to being God, to create life. How can there be anything greater of an experience in a human life than to be God?
Right. It's a pretty integral part of our. So, do we just need to speak about this more as objectivists? Do we just need to write some essays about this, about the things we're saying here?
Clearly, something needs to be done, because I don't know if this is Charles II that has been poisoning people. I don't think it's only that. Ayn Rand, unfortunately, was blind, had these blind spots. She remained silent on so many issues. And this has just opened up for people to misinterpret what she was saying.
I wish she would have done more or known more about evolution, because that's the path down which we are going here to talk about these things. And can we surmise that she might have avoided evolution because the evidence of IQ difference, perhaps the evidence of societal differences and stuff, and she didn't want to go down the eugenics path and the Nazis and superior race, and it was just too much in her lifetime. She was surrounded by it.
I'm going to have a little theory here. I've noted for various reasons that many Jews who are incredibly intelligent, score very high in IQ, are some of the most virulently opposed to acknowledging IQ as a concept. So the people who actually score high on IQ deny it. And I think that this is something that has to do with World War II and the belief that if we bring back the concept of IQ, it's going to bring attention to Jews, and it's going to put Jews in danger, and it's going to be bad. I think that's why I think so many Jews, including Ayn Rand, didn't talk about this.
Interesting idea. By proving Jews have a high IQ, they'll be put in danger.
Now, of course, if they knew the truth, they wouldn't say that, because one of the things that the first thing Nazis threw out was the IQ test that showed that the Jews were exceptionally intelligent.
Right.
So, because that didn't fit their narrative that they were born with an evil gene. So their explanation was that Jews did well in finance because they were exceptionally evil. They were just willing to do the dirty work that other people weren't. That was the Nazis' conception. And the idea that they were making money because they were smart completely destroyed that idea. So a lot of people could have been saved in the Holocaust if they just had known about IQ research.
Well, but the Nazis say it doesn't matter if they're smart because they're evil.
No, they denied that they were smart.
All right. So if we had IQ research, we could have avoided the Holocaust.
And we could have avoided slavery.
Wouldn't the Nazis just say we have to defend ourselves against these psychopathic geniuses?
Now that's a different story, but at least it would have been much harder for them to make a case, because now you have actually a virtuous reason for why many Jews had a lot of money. They were creating value because they were smart.
Yeah. So what are you proposing, that we don't need to fear IQ in the way that the Nazis were using it?
I'm proposing the exact opposite. The more we know about IQ and are honest about it, the less we have to fear of Nazis. It's an inoculation against Nazism and against slavery.
All right. Now I fear maybe this should be a topic on its own.
This is okay. So I just wanted to say that I think that maybe Ayn Rand didn't go into that stuff because of her cultural heritage.
Wow.
She was afraid of these topics. That might be it.
Yeah. And
that might be also one of the reasons, as you said, that she avoided evolution. May or may not. I don't know. Who cares? The point is that for some reason she didn't go very much into evolution. And that's a shame, because her theory fits like a glove with evolution. And in fact, she more or less reinvented biology as a branch of metaphysics, right?
Yeah, she brought it in. Yeah.
Yes, so she was a genius on all forms, and her ideas fits perfectly with biology, but she just didn't take that step for various reasons. I mean, she was a novelist. I mean, what do we expect from her? She revolutionized so many areas of philosophy. Can't she leave a little bit left to us to pick up the pieces to do work? Yeah. So I'm not blaming her for anything. I mean, she did a brilliant job. She didn't invent GIM. She didn't talk much about evolution. Okay, so what? That means that there's more work left for us to do. But it means also that, unfortunately, there are people that can misinterpret her, like Charles II, apparently, who has been spreading ideas that are not really mature understandings of Ayn Rand.
You know, I have to mention a little plug here. I've been doing a series of Charles II. I just started with his first video, and I'm watching them, and I just stop and comment as I'm watching them. I haven't posted any of them yet. I'm going to try to get some Patreon support before I start posting them or something. But
I think that's a good idea. I noticed that you picked up some new listeners after the MGTOW. Sandman mentioned you.
Yeah.
So that was great. Hopefully there's going to come something good out of that.
Yeah. All right, let's tie this topic up and finish that video. Thank you for viewing, ladies and gentlemen. We'll title this "Happiness." Can we title it something? I always like to troll my good objectivist viewers with bad titles like "Religion for Objectivists" and stuff like that. Shall we title this "Was Ayn Rand Truly Happy Without Kids" or something like that?
If you want to, I like that. That is a very trollish title.
All right, coming up, something about happiness. There we go.